Representative Paulsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, also for holding this hearing. As was mentioned earlier, both from, I think, your outsetting statement as well as from the folks that testified today, the economic numbers that came out today, if anything, show that the economy is not on solid enough footing, or our anemic growth levels are such, they are such anemic growth levels that there's a lot more we can be doing to jumpstart our economy and put people back to work. And certainly tax reform, I think many of us really do believe that tax reform is the vehicle to getting our economy back on track and on solid footing. And it's not about doing tax reform for tax reform's sake. It's definitely about making the tax code simpler and fair and more competitive. That is the one word that has really stood out. And as the topic of the hearing talks about looking at past history in terms of, the Reagan tax reform and with the Democratic Congress and the successes, and no tax reform is perfect. And certainly there were strengths and weaknesses in both the 81 and the 86 tax acts. And I'm wondering if maybe you can just reflect a little bit. Dr. Hess, I'll start with you. What were some of the major strengths and what were some of the major weaknesses? And then Dr. Tyson, you can comment also, because you referenced in 1986 we were at the lowest. The U.S. had the lowest corporate tax rate, and everyone's adjusted since then. How did our actions create sort of a worldwide revolution in tax policy? Dr. Hass?
I'll begin. I think that the biggest strength of the 86 Act was the reduction in the individual side marginal rate. I think there were two weaknesses that Dr. Gravel alluded to. One of them, that on the corporate side, that basically increased the tax on new capital in order to reduce the tax on old capital. And there were also a number of technical changes to things like passive loss rules that many people attribute to, or think might have caused a real collapse in the non-residential real estate market. That I think that was like a bigger mess than people anticipated when they wrote the bill. But I would say that those are the pluses and minuses that are the headliners for me.
Good. Dr. Tyson?
So I would like to point out that I think that at the time it would not have been clear exactly how the world was going to change. And what I want to emphasize is we had a pretty good, it had pros and cons, and you've heard a couple of them, pretty good tax reform in 1986, but the world is so different now. And it's different because the share of the world's purchasing power out of the United States is so much larger, because in every sector of the economy, or practically every sector of the economy, there are serious new competitors, not just from developed countries, but from developing countries. So the U.S. companies have had to in many cases, just to serve those foreign markets, have had to move production there, have had to move employment there. Sometimes it's to jump tariff walls. Sometimes it's because companies condition their sales to their customers by being there. Sometimes it's just because you have to design the product better by being close to the customers you're selling to. So what's happened here is that U.S. companies, multinational companies, which still to this day, locate most of their activity in the United States, but a large part of their markets have migrated. And so now they're in a situation where they look at the tax rate in the United States, they look at the tax rate in the other location. That becomes an additional reason to go to the other location. Then they look at the fact that their earnings from the other location are getting much larger a share of their total earnings, and they can't bring it back to the United States without paying that additional tax. So we've got to change the system. I use in my testimony the word modern. Let's just say it's realistic. It's the system. We have to say this is the world as it is. We can't re-engineer the world. We have to reform our tax system to deal with this world.
No. Governor? No.
Congressman, if I could ask just two quick things. Once again, I continue to support Dr. Tyson and her idea of the repatriation of assets, because I've seen it in the real world. What's the rate in Europe? Blended rate in Europe, all these experts, it's 20%, isn't it? Yeah, it's 20%.
Blended OECD rate is in the order of 25.
20,
it's actually, but let's say it depends on how you weight it.
So, and we're at 40. So the point is this: we've got to go below that. That has got to be our goal and our aim and our national objective. And second of all, I'm getting increasingly uncomfortable with this discussion here about siloing the corporate tax rate. We at Free Congress think you have to look at the entire tax code in order to be able to put enough components together to get to your goals and objectives. If you just silo the corporate tax rate, then you get into some argument about how you're going to pay for it. Next thing you know, you don't do anything.
And knowing that, many small businesses obviously are paying under that individual rate, and that's where a lot of jobs come from. There are a lot of us that do believe that we cannot leave one off the table without making sure we get our economy back on solid footing without helping small business. So I yield back.